We are going to solve more quadratic equations in this video. Last video we started the square root method. Let's do one more example with the square root method. So notice while we do have an x minus 2 on 2b right here, that whole thing is squared. So if I take the square root of it, I'll just get the inside without the exponent. Kind of like if I was to square 3 squared. I just get a 3. Whoops. Because that's really square root of 9, right? So like at first I don't know what x is, but I do know if I square root that quantity, that parenthesis, it'll just get rid of the 2. You just got to make sure you do it to both sides. So we get plus or minus square root of 6. And then the nice thing with this method is you're practically done. Just add a 2 to both sides, and we have 2 plus or minus square root of 6. Now people get confused by that plus or minus. All it means is there are 2 answers. There's one answer that's positive, and then there's one answer where you're subtracting, like that. If you plug into the original, let's get rid of the square root signs for a moment. So if I plug in, I would get 2 plus square root of 6 minus 2. So the 2's would cancel out. And if I square root of 6, I just get a 6. And that happens with both of those. 2's cancel out. On that second one, I would get negative square root of 6 squared, and that's like a negative times a negative. So it checks out. That's our answer. Very quick, very easy. All right, next method is called completing the square. And to be honest, some people struggle with it because they feel like we're making up things as we go, and to be honest, we are. So maybe next to that rule, write the form of a quadratic equation, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And after you get done copying that down, look at the form there, and we're worried about this term right here. And this is kind of like the formula. And if you can't read that, maybe Word auto-corrected a little differently. Like it just looks funny. It's supposed to be that fraction squared, what I circled up there. So that's the formula to make completing the square work. B over 2 squared. So see, I underlined whatever that number is in front of the x term is what we want to half and then square. All right, let's look at an actual problem. So on number 3, I have a pretty simple equation. I could honestly solve this one by factoring, but I want to show you all completing the square. So in this problem, b is 8. And if you're confused because it doesn't really look like this right here, and it doesn't really, it's like it's lacking something. There's no c term, right? C is just 0. So you ignore that and you use the b of 8 and plug it into the little completing the square formula. And we're going to end up squaring 4, which is 16. So that's the number we want to add to both sides. Now let's back up just a second. Let me give you another example over here on the side. If we had this problem right here, I would say factor it and then you're about done. So we need 2 numbers that multiply to 9. They add up to 6, and hopefully you say 3, or 2 3s, which since I have 2 duplicate factors, I can write it as 1 squared, right? And then square root both sides, and you're about done. So we want that situation to happen in completing the square. And by that, or that happen, I mean this right here. I want to get a squared binomial or a perfect square trinomial, however you describe it. I want that scenario to happen. So that's why we found the number 16 over there, right here. And that's going to help us create that situation. So I'm literally going to pull the number 16 out of thin air. Whoops, I don't want a 0, do I? So I scoop my equal sign over, because I know I'm going to have to add something. And I discover it is a plus 16. So the red writing is what I created. Remember, whatever you do to one side, you're allowed to do to the other. So yes, we made up the number 16, but I did it to both sides, and we're allowed to. And the benefit is because I need two numbers that multiply to 16 that add up to 8, and I get a really nice scenario with this. It's like we're making the problem, forcing the problem to be easier. Although some would argue we're complicating things, but I don't know. Once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty quick. So you square root both sides, and we get x plus 4 equals plus or minus 4. And by the way, remember, this is just one method. There's 4 methods in this packet of notes. We're about to learn quadratic formula, and that way will always work. So if you can't make this way work, then push it aside and try the quadratic formula. It'll work on any quadratic situation. So we have one equation that says x plus 4 equals positive 4. Subtract a 4, and we get 0. I have another solution that says negative 4. Subtract a 4, and we get negative 8. Plug in 0, and I get 0 plus 0 equals 0. So that checks out. Plug in negative 8, and I get 64 minus 64, which is 0. We're done. All right, let's try one more completing the square. This one is a touch more difficult because there's a plus 2 there. And by the way, try and factor that. You know, I'm going to erase this. It looks kind of crowded there. So if you try and factor that, there are no two numbers that multiply to 2 that add to negative 6. So factoring doesn't work. But let's start with the completing the square formula. What's b? B is negative 6. So you plug it into this thing. And we divide and we get negative 3. You square it and you get 9, right? Everyone okay with that? So I come over here to solve. And I know that if I had a plus 9 right there, because I just found 9 on my completing the square formula, this would work perfectly. Let me write above it. I hate going sideways like that, so let me get the equation right above it so we can reference it instead of having to look across. So I wish I just had a 9 there, which I can write there as long as I add it to the other side, but that 2 is in the way. So I like to move the 2 to the right side because it's no good to us. So I get it out of the way, I push it to the other side. So right now I'm sitting here like this. Make sure you add 9 to the other side. Don't forget. It is so easy to forget. And now, while it looks weird on the right side because we're going to end up with a 7, we have that 9. I can factor that thing. Looks like negative 3 and negative 3 equals 7, which then is x minus 3 squared equals 7. Square root both sides. And we get x minus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 7. And add 3 to both sides. And to be honest, that one is a monster to plug in. So we are just going to skip the plugging in part and just call it good with that. All right? All right. Hopefully that made sense. I'll do number 5 in the next video. You should practice it on your own. And I will see you in class.